Hello friends of Biblia Libre, I'm Edgar Escobar. Welcome to Sin Pelos en la Lengua from Biblia Libre. And today we will analyze the response made by a so-called self-proclaimed journalist named Ricardo Gonzalez. Because, well, we made a video about the idea he was spreading, which actually came from Brazil. It wasn't something he came up with himself. That the Brazilian national team and the Colombian national team, and probably some others, were failures, according to him, in the World Cup because of the evangelicals in these teams. That's the general idea, in a very broad sense. So, I made a video where I argued against this, and he made a response video, which I really enjoyed and watched with great delight, because when I heard the arguments, I thought, this is incredible. So today we're going to counter this so-called journalists' arguments. And let's start from the beginning. He, like a good sophist, instead of arguing against my arguments, argued against me as a person.
Christian or evangelical leaders and pastors get angry and scared that we are exposing their doctrine, which has done so much harm to our Latin American society beyond just soccer. That's why we're going to respond to this man, Edgar Escobar, who calls himself a Colombian minister, who indoctrinates through a website about the Bible, and who has been living off people's beliefs for more than 30 years. In other words, another merchant of faith. To this Mr. Escobar, I start by telling him that there is no hate speech in my video, in which I give arguments and not just opinions about why evangelicals have ruined Brazilian soccer. Because I am not talking about persecuting, discriminating against, or crushing anyone who practices any religion. What I do is warn believers not to let themselves be manipulated by religious charlatans who only want to scam them. And it's said that a thief thinks everyone steals, and that's why this man accuses me of hate when it's actually the language his religion uses. For them, anything that is different or outside their control is considered evil and must be rejected. Women's rights, the LGBTI community, art, culture, migrants, vulnerable populations like farmers and indigenous people, and even people with disabilities. This religious political trend is academically documented as Christofascism, and more recently as Christian neofascism, which is the one that came to power with Bolsonaro a few years ago in Brazil, and it's the one that will come to power in Colombia in a month with De La Esprit.
Now, this is called an ad hominem argument. That is against the person making the argument and not the argument itself. He is saying that I am afraid, that I am angry, and he generalizes. Pastors are afraid and are angry. Well, first of all, this is called poisoning the well. That's what they call it in journalism, right? I am not afraid or angry. I am calm and happy. Because if anyone has truly made it their business, and those who know me are aware of this, to expose false teachers, false prophets, and all these manipulative people, because they do exist, it's me. I've been doing this for 10 years. And if this gentleman were a real journalist, wouldn't he have at least looked into my YouTube channel to realize that my work is mainly about exposing false pastors? That's what I've been doing for more than 10 years on this channel. So I'm not afraid. If he had done his homework, he would have realized that I don't live off any parishioner's money. That I have a degree in social sciences, yes sir, from the Universidad Distrital, and that I worked for more than 19 years as a teacher in Colombia, teaching political science, economics, philosophy, history, and of course, religion. All those subjects. And I've worked as a teacher my whole life. I still work as a teacher. I don't receive any money. Not from any congregation. Even though I lead an international ministry called Biblia Libre, which is in more than 6 countries here in Latin America, but I don't receive any money from any of those congregations. Not a single cent. I don't need to, because I'm bivocational, because I have my job. So all his arguments against me as a person are based on nothing, because he has no idea who I am. And this already makes me wonder, really, what kind of journalist is he? Why is he attacking me as a person without having any basis for that kind of thing? I'm also a radio and TV announcer and producer at the Colegio Superior de Telecomunicaciones. And I have worked for many years in the media. So if you did a little research, you would know, for example, that I was a student of Marden Devia, who introduced me to everything related to sports journalism. I chose a different path because I felt called elsewhere. But yes, I did get my start in that with a great teacher. Marden is an excellent teacher. This, in addition to being an ad hominem fallacy, is also a genetic fallacy. That is, that my ideas are false because I supposedly profit from those ideas. First, my income does not come from my ideas, but from my professional work, because I am a professional. And even if this man doesn't believe it, yes, there are many of us professionals in different areas of the social sciences and other sciences who are Christians and who have a Christian faith. Many, really many. The fact that he doesn't know them is not my problem. Now, even if what this man says against me were true, which it isn't, but even if it were true, it doesn't invalidate my argument. Because what you have to attack, sir, are arguments. And here we come to the second fallacy that he uses. What I call, or what is philosophically called, the false dilemma fallacy. What he says is simple. He presents two possibilities. I say that he is spreading a message of hate, and he says that he is not spreading a message of hate, because what he is spreading are arguments. This is a false dilemma. I mean, he is presenting the dilemma in the following way. Either I spread a message of hate or I present arguments, but I can't do both at the same time. And that's not true, my dear friend. Or did the man with the funny mustache not have arguments in the middle of his message of hate? Of course he did. The fact that you make arguments doesn't mean your arguments don't carry a message of hate. And obviously they do carry a message of hate. And I'm going to argue why his arguments carry a message of hate. Number one, because he makes unsupported generalizations. I mean, you take evangelicals and you take Pentecostals, Methodists, Baptists, Neo-Pentecostals, Charismatics. You put them all in the same group. As if we all preach the same thing. As if everyone's ethics were exactly the same. As if we could all produce the same effect in people's minds through the message we preach. While there are some fundamental principles on which we agree, in practice there are also many differences among us. So it's a generalization. Second, you promote stereotypes. What does it mean to promote stereotypes? Well, obviously it's a message of hate, insults. So now evangelicals get collectively blamed because of us. Apparently, in this gentleman's opinion, evangelicals don't have the right to be soccer players. It's our fault that our national teams fail. I mean, how can you tell me that's not a message of hate when he says phrases like these? And I quote, evangelicals are an invading force that ruins soccer. No, but that's not a message of hate, right? No? How could that be hate? They manipulate the poor. They destroy social relationships. They promote mediocrity. They stir up hatred against groups. Isn't that really a message of hate? A message? My God, thank God it's not a message of hate. What if it was? I mean, thank goodness it's a message full of love, I suppose. I think so. He even uses the term Christofascism, which is a pretty questionable category. Yeah, and thank goodness he doesn't promote a message of hate. What if he did promote hate speech? Oh my God! Of course, those are arguments that promote hate, because he's discriminating against those of us who supposedly discriminate against others. Doesn't that seem like a complete contradiction to you? It's obviously a message of hate. Besides, it's based on his opinion. And maybe some text he read from Brazil, from some journalists. But there's no serious investigation. There are no serious arguments. I can argue, for example, from The Games People Play, Theology, Religion and Sports by Robert Ellis, a wonderful text that truly analyzes how religion, various religions, influence some people's behavior in sports. Another very good text, Cross the Line, by Ollie Baines and Liam Flynn. Excellent text. Tower to Gold by Jeremy Jones. These are serious texts. Research. You may agree or not, but at least they are based on something. Not on opinion, not on casual coffee shop talk, where a man you would assume is a serious journalist ends up getting involved with this topic. Generalizing, grouping everyone together, using these kinds of expressions that are definitely, and I stand by these expressions of hate. I mean, tell me if they're not. I may not agree with a person like you, sir. But that doesn't mean I have to insult you. I make my case to you. Us claiming superiority against prejudice while reducing millions of Latin Americans to a mass of ignorant, manipulated, and socially destructive people. That's a message of hate. Then he commits 2 more fallacies. Listen to him.
Although this is much more than soccer and is highly political, let's focus on soccer, the issue that has led many Latin Americans to question the harm these churches cause. This person starts by saying that the problem with the Brazilian national team is not because of religion, but only because the soccer business has changed to the detriment of Latinos. But then why has Argentina had such an amazing national team these past few years? The answer is given by the same Mr. Escobar, and it's because Brazilians no longer train in the neighborhood or on the beach. Because Pentecostalism, which is like an invasive species in our society, not only forbids watching TV shows or listening to music, because supposedly it's diabolical, but it also affected our social relationships, because it breeds distrust of others, in line with the individualistic logic it follows. Which, for example, ended the possibility of the Jogo Bonito continuing to be created in the streets.
There are fallacies everywhere here. I'll just mention a few. He states, and I quote, just because the football business changed. He says, that's my argument, that Brazil lost just because the football business changed. But that's not what I said, sorry. You're cutting off my argument, I'm quoting you in full here. But you did cut off what I said. I didn't say that Brazil lost just because of that. There are many more reasons we can use to explain Brazil's failure. And among those many reasons, we can't prove in any way that the players' faith is one of them. That's what I'm saying. Now regarding Colombia. As for Colombia, that's the most laughable argument. So now it's the evangelicals' fault that Colombia has a loser mentality, that we always lose, that we always get beaten in penalty shootouts. Is it the evangelicals' fault that Colombians always lose in penalty shootouts? Seriously? Don't we almost always lose in penalty shootouts? I'm not going to generalize. We've won once in a while, very occasionally, but yes. But seriously, is it really the evangelicals' fault that we don't have a winning mentality? Look, as a historian, really, the history of Colombia is the history of war. As a Colombian, I sadly admit it's true. Colombia's history is one of failure. We have a beautiful land, very capable and intelligent people, and yet because of our hatred, quarrels, whims, and selfishness, we are always losing. Our mentality is not a product of evangelical faith. Not at all. It's the product of many other things. Reducing it simply to, since they're evangelicals, they have a poor and loser mentality, and that's why they lost, is far too simplistic from a sociological standpoint. You still haven't answered me about Max Weber, which I mentioned earlier. So, I talked about a set of things, not just one, but a set. Why? What am I basing this on? In the book by Ronaldo El Elal, called Pases y Callejones sin Salida, El Fútbol y la Cultura de Masas en Brasil. That is indeed a serious book that analyzes, since 1997, why Brazilian soccer has been in decline. And it gives quite strong arguments with statistical data, sociological analysis. And guess what? Mr. So-called journalist, nowhere does it mention the religiosity of Brazilians. Surely, there may be studies that involve religiosity, because it can't be completely ruled out from social behavior, but obviously it's not the main factor for a team to lose or win. Number 2, the fallacy of asking why Argentina wins. That's what he argues. So why does Argentina win? Why Argentina? If it were because of the football business, Argentina wouldn't win. We have to remind the gentleman a little that Argentina has had great difficulties after the 1990 World Cup in the following World Cups, basically until Brazil 2014 when they were runners-up, and for them that's a failure, right? And then we could get to Qatar 2022 where they finally triumphed after winning a cup, or several Copa Americas. That was a long process caused by a large number of factors that played a role in the changes that had been taking place in Argentine soccer. Argentine soccer had also been going through a rough patch for many years, and they had to make investments in several soccer projects on different fronts in order to achieve the success they have now. So it's not just a single factor, but many interrelated factors that led Argentina to be where it is today and to achieve what it has achieved. And even so, we have to say that it was very difficult for Argentina in this last World Cup. They had to struggle a lot to get as far as they did. So, sorry, this doesn't destroy my argument at all. On the contrary, it strengthens it. And how does it strengthen it? Because on top of all this, there are also Christians on the Argentine team, whether you like it or not. Enzo Fernandez, Gonzalo Montiel, Ezequiel Palacios, Leandro Paredes. There are Christian soccer players. That doesn't mean they win. That doesn't mean they win. I'm never saying that. But they don't lose because of them either. Number 3, the straw man of the German example. Let's listen to him.
There's more. Because this gentleman, as a good promoter of evangelicals, uses falsehoods to justify his arguments. Look at the lie he tells here. Please, where does he get that all the German champion players were Protestants? Frank Beckenbauer, champion as a player in 74 and as a coach in 90, was Catholic, just like Miroslav Klose. Meanwhile, Thomas Müller never showed any signs of being religious. These last two were champions in 2014. So there's something important about Germany and its champion teams that this gentleman is omitting. Their driving force was not religion or players kneeling on the field, but rather the idea of reunifying their population, which today is more diverse. So what Escobar says about Germany's past success being due to supposed religiosity is nonsense.
And here he brings up another straw man. I have to admit that the way I presented the argument sounded very general. But I never said that all Germans were Protestant Christians. I never said that. I basically said that I wasn't very specific. I should have said the majority. Because obviously, Germany has a majority of Protestants compared to Catholics. But even so, at no point did I say that the Germans won because they were Christians. No. I used the example in the opposite way, and he reversed it. Because what he's saying is that I argued that the Germans won 4 World Cup titles because they're Christians. And that's not what I said. I said, even though there have always been many Protestants among the Germans, I can't say that's the reason why they won 4 World Cup championships. Should I explain it this way or with drawings? Among the Germans, there have always been many Protestants. Examples. Horst Eckel, world champion in 1954 during something called the Miracle of Bern. He spoke openly about his faith. Klinsmann, world champion in 1990. He even appeared in an article called Soy Evangelico. People talk about their faith, which gathers testimonies from Protestant Christian personalities from all over the world. World champion and captain in 2014, the Evangelical Church of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern directly described him as Brother Philip Lamb. The Evangelical, the Protestant. Mertesacker, world champion in 2014. In that same ecclesiastical publication, he is presented as a defender of the faith. That's not even including Gotze, Jérôme Boateng, Bastian Schweinsteiger, etc. I mean, I'm not lying. The German national team has always had many Protestants. In Germany, they're called Protestants, not evangelicals. Now, he argues that Beckenbauer was Catholic, and not just Beckenbauer. Look at Neuer, Klose, Podolski, and many others who have also been Catholic. Yes, sir, of course. That is, what you just said by stating that Beckenbauer was Catholic actually reinforces my point and not yours. Why? Because his dilemma was not Catholics versus Protestants or Roman Catholic thought against Protestant thought. No, his dilemma was religious people versus, well, people who don't practice their religion. They don't practice it, whether they have it or not. Or do you think a Catholic wouldn't thank God after winning a soccer match? Or if a Catholic loses a soccer match, a practicing Catholic won't say, well, the Lord has allowed it this way and we need to work harder. He would answer just like Daniel Munoz. Yes, because we don't differ on this. God's sovereignty is a theme that runs throughout all of Christianity. So the fact that you argue there are many Catholics on the German national team only serves to reinforce my point. It's just that, sir. If the logic you're proposing here about Germany, Catholics versus Protestants, were real, then we'd have to say that Italy was eliminated because most of its players are Roman Catholics. That's not the case, right? Doesn't add up. And they have 3 World Cups. Well, that's what I think, right? To be coherent and consistent with the logic of the argument. Now, your argument completely falls apart. Completely. When we analyze, at least in the Colombian national team, most of the players are still Catholic. Some just express a faith in God, and that's it. They don't identify with any particular denomination. Yes, in Brazil, most of the players do identify as evangelical. But in reality, very few actually practice. Very few. So I repeat, the point isn't that they're going to win just because they're Christians. Just like the point isn't that they lost because they're Christians either. And then he uses the argument that German reunification was the reason they won. Well, that only applies after 1990 and only for that World Cup, because in 2014 that didn't have the same impact as it did in 1990. I might believe it for 1990. Maybe. But the German victory wasn't due to the reunification of Germany, much less to the religion of the Germans, but rather to a series of other factors that aren't really my topic. I'm not an expert on that, so I'm not going to explain it. And finally, the conspiracy fallacy. From the Pentecostal devil!
Finally, this person alludes to the idea of God's will, which, as I told you in the previous video, can lead to mediocrity. Not only in soccer, but in all areas. That's another thing this man says, who literally makes a living off other people's beliefs. Well, it's just another deception, because even though he publicly claims this thing about personal responsibility in the services of these mega churches, the doctrine they teach is that each person's successes happen because they have faith in God, and failures or setbacks occur because that's how it was written and what God wanted. Daniel Munoz said this to wash his hands and avoid blame. Shameful, which of course has a negative effect on each person's performance. So to the supposed evangelical minister, Edgar Escobar, I warn him that among the merchants of faith, they have reasons to sound the alarms. Characters like him and other evangelical leaders who are now involved in politics in Colombia have hidden for years behind a very powerful brand called God to achieve their own interests. But the mask is slowly coming off, because Latin American society is beginning to wake up from the lethargy caused by evangelicals through a foreign doctrine that was implanted in our countries like a parasite sent by the United States to fight leftist Catholicism, and that has only generated hatred, division, and rejection of diversity, which is what characterizes us.
Each person's successes are because of faith in God, and each person's failures are because God wanted it that way. No. That's not how we think. He doesn't understand or know what we believe. Historic Christians don't believe that. Historic Christians believe in human responsibility and how God uses human responsibility to fulfill His sovereign purpose. I'd have to give you a theology class. Here I invite you to my theology classes so you can understand how both things work. They do work perfectly. That means that God determined to fulfill His sovereign purpose is human responsibility, but we are still responsible. That's why it doesn't apply. What he says about Daniel Munoz, which I also find quite rude, and I think he ignores the whole context of what Daniel Munoz said. For example, Daniel Munoz said the team gave it their all. Human responsibility, created opportunities. I mean, we did it. We were superior at times. We had the ball at certain moments. And now we have to lift ourselves up. Human responsibility. We have to try harder, get up from this, and keep working. Where is the mediocre thinking? Where? So, you take one part of what Daniel Munoz said to accuse him of mediocre thinking, and you forget that everything else Daniel Munoz said focuses on human responsibility. And yes, sir, I know there are some neo-Pentecostal groups that teach this incorrectly. I'm not saying we all teach the same thing, but I'm sure it has nothing to do with the soccer performance of people who work their whole lives to be the best athletes they can be. And you're simply trying to ignore that, because you have a message that clearly shows the hatred and contempt you have toward us. Evangelical Christians. They don't hate you or any atheist or any of these groups. Not at all. Even though We don't agree with your positions, we don't feel hatred. We explain why we disagree. And we have arguments for not agreeing, but we have the right to disagree, just as you have the right to disagree with us. So all of this comes down to something very simple, very straightforward. That you, as a journalist, didn't want to understand, and that you twisted my words to make them seem like something else. The issue and argument have always remained the same. Evangelical faith is neither a sufficient nor a necessary cause to win or lose in a World Cup. Case closed, and I'm done. And I want to dedicate to you, from the bottom of my heart, Proverbs, chapter 18, verse 2, New International Version. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in airing his own opinions. Yes, gentlemen. I'm not speaking here just to give my opinion. I believe our Christian faith, Diana, strengthens us and gives us many tools to face life in many ways, in very positive ways. Being a Christian is very beneficial in our work, whatever our profession may be, but it is not the cause of our ultimate triumph or our failure. We are responsible, and at the same time, we are guided by God in everything we do. There is an explanation for that. But now I invite you, what do you think about what this so-called journalist says? Do you agree or not? Write it here in the comment box. Tell this gentleman what you really think. Share this video on all your social networks. And thank you for being with us here on Sin Pelos en la Lengua from Biblia Libre.